Day two of match days in the Women's World Cup is in the books. Let's talk about these results. Okay, the first result really that came up is this Canada versus Nigeria game is a very. How do you read this? On paper, Canada dominated the possession. If you watch the game, you know the more dangerous chances all came from Nigeria's side on the counter. You almost feel as if Nigeria was a little bit more ambitious, they could have come away with 3 points instead of one. I think one of the BBC commentators said it best: a draw for Nigeria is a victory, but a draw for Canada is a missed opportunity. This game is an interesting tactical mess, but then ultimately, because again, guys, I'm Canadian, so I'll give you a bit more on the Canadian side, for at least from my perspective. I feel like Nigeria was a bit more defensive than they needed to be. They didn't need to play them straight up. I think the low block cost Canada a lot of struggles, and they weren't able to properly break it down as much as they would have liked to. But I think Nigeria had every opportunity to win this game. There's a moment in the first half where Kalen Sheridan tries to play a ball coming in, misplays and leaves the goal open. If not for Vanessa Gilles, it's a 1-0 victory. It's 1-0 up for the Super Falcons. But Canada had their opportunity. Sinclair in the early parts of the first half put a shot where she's all alone out wide. I think Canada's three best chances in this game were the penalty by Sinclair, which we'll get to, the the miss in the first half, and then Evelyn Vienne putting the ball onto frame once coming into the game. And this felt like where I think we have to ask the question in terms of this Canada team. We know there's injuries. We know there's players who aren't fully fit. How much can you squeeze out of that while still getting results? The big story of this game was no Jesse Fleming. Apparently, if you play for Chelsea, you're going to miss time. Sam Kerr, Jesse Fleming, please protect Ashley Lawrence and Kadisha Buchanan with our lives. But I felt Canada missed a bit in the midfield in terms of just driving the play. There were a couple times in the midfield where Canada was fine, and Nigeria was also comfortable with just letting them pass the ball around. They weren't too worried about Canada with the ball. They weren't too worried about Canada passing it because they felt that, y'all can do that. We are just going to be comfortable playing in this low block here and not feeling the pressure. And it felt as if Nigeria was perfectly fine with that type of strategy. Which leads to the question of, does Canada still struggle with low blocks? I wouldn't say that they struggle with them, but they haven't found solutions on a rather early basis. And I think what you need from that is there weren't as many shots outside of that 18, which I think is a bit of a concern. There was a couple opportunities where Quinn gets the ball at the edge of the box, and instead of lining up a shot, they look for a pass. Maybe, again, from the field standpoint, you don't see it, but watching it on the broadcast, it just looks like you could have lined up this shot, let one go, but they didn't do it. And I feel that as the game progressed, there weren't enough players for me. It looked as if there were players who were trying to create things, but you couldn't really do it. And as that continued, the Falcons grew more and more comfortable into the game. The Falcons felt as if, you know what, we can take our countering chances and create some opportunities. A few big saves by Kalen Sheridan in those both halves to keep the game very much in a 0-0 draw. But the big talking point for Canadians is going to be, outside of the struggle, is the penalty, right? And it's eerily familiar sounds of what we heard when Davies missed the penalty in the Men's World Cup. Should this person be the player taking it? Now, realistically, the designated PK taker is Jessie Fleming. She was out. So then is the next person Sinclair? It would make sense, but then we saw Sinclair miss the penalty at the Olympics. We saw Sinclair miss penalties in other times. I won't say that's something that she necessarily shies away from, but she's willing to give it up. So take from that as you will. And I think maybe it's something that's in her head, maybe a thing from that nature, but I think that penalty was a big moment, bigly saved, bigly saved. And the Super Falcons were able to play well, but then I think when you started making those substitutions, then you started to see a little bit of things that were missing on the pitch. For Canada, a Chloe Lacasse and Evelyn Vienne. Evelyn Vienne in this type of a game would have been, I think, an ideal type of a person just because using the spaces and quick movements from the space, I think they would have suited that best. And especially now that, Canada's playing Ireland next, a team that will sit back and they will pressure and press. I think it'll be interesting how much the Irish take from the girls in green, how much they take from what Nigeria did and try to implement into what they want to do. They'll still play a physical game, but maybe instead of trying to play through them, maybe this is where you take advantage of those counters. When the ball got into the midfield, and that's the other thing, in the beginning part of the game, Canada was winning a lot of those second balls, which was springing them on the counter, which causing Nigeria to sit very deep in their low block. When Nigeria started to win them, that's when they started to press up, take away some of the spaces, and really start to attack and press the midfield and the back line. And they were getting in on the wings. Jade Riviere wasn't having a struggle, but Jade Riviere's side was definitely being attacked. And then eventually, Ashley Lawrence died for her sins in this game. I mean, she got cleats to the leg, cleats to the everything. Ashley Lawrence, ice bath for you. You deserve it. But this leaves Group B in a very interesting spot because now both teams aren't dead. And their next matchups are very intriguing. You could argue both teams can come away with 4 points. You could see a scenario where Nigeria beats Australia. Again, there's no Sam Kerr. Sam Kerr may not be available until the last game, and that changes things dynamically. Now, where I think Nigeria would have to be careful against the Matildas is that this is now another game where they can start to play through the midfield and get more comfortable with that. The Matildas didn't seem as comfortable through that. And the Canadians could find passing lanes in the midfield. They weren't going to them as often as I think as they were available. And I think if the Matildas do that, now you put Nigeria into a bind. They also need players. If you're the Matildas looking at Nigeria, the one thing to keep in mind is if you're gonna drive towards the ball, if you're gonna drive the ball towards the other team, you have to be able to move players off of that. And I think this is where it gets very interesting and intriguing in terms of can a player like Tony Payne more inside create more problems for the Matildas driving the ball and causing players to have to defend? Or will it just be both teams? Because in this case, both teams are comfortable defending. But Group B, Australia 3 points, Canada, Nigeria with 1 point, and then Ireland with no points. A very intriguing group. On to game number 2, the Swiss versus the Philippines. The Philippines started off on the front foot. I mean, it's really unfortunate that their first goal was disallowed due to an offsides. But that team really did come and, showed their marks. I think going into this, I thought maybe a team like that would want to sit back. And if you look at the possession numbers, 74-26 roughly. And it was just one way dominant. Philippines holding to the ball, defending well. But eventually, the penalty to Ramona Bachmann, and then Pibel puts away her chance in the 64th minute. And the Swiss are up. Switzerland is interesting, which makes a very intriguing matchup for Group A. Because the next matchup is Switzerland versus Norway. And then New Zealand versus the Philippines. Norway has to be careful here. Because if they're not careful, any result, if they lose to the Swiss, simply put, Norway need a win. They need a point out of that game. Because Norway truly cannot go down by that. They'd have to hope that the Swiss either, just 1 point and then goal difference. Because right now, if Switzerland wins that matchup, Norway is effectively eliminated, which is wild to me. It's wild to me, but not surprising. Based off what we saw, maybe the Norwegian team can get it together. But man, this makes that match day 2 very fascinating in that group. And then Spain versus Costa Rica was one-way traffic. It was one-way traffic. Costa Rica had one shot on the game. In Spain, it was just shooting gallery, passing, shooting. 46 shots, 12 on target, 81 possession. This is no surprise. This is the Spain that we come to see. This is the Spain we've come to play. This Spanish team truly is looking good. And that moving with bringing players like Puteas off the bench, Redono off the bench, like this Spanish team is going to be a problem as they continue to gain form moving through. Guys, if you watched day 2 of matchups, I finally got some sleep, which I'm excited about. How do you feel? Let me know in the comments below. Because that's day 2. Breakfast with the cup. You guys let me know in the comments down below.